The first one is by Bojan Mitrović, who is a researcher, and he's connected with the history of the 19th and 20th century in the Balkans, and he has worked on different subjects, including institutional history, and of historiography, urban history, and history of the Jews. So, Bojan Mitrović will speak to us about Yugoslavian between communism and consumerism. That is a sort of introduction, as I told you this morning, to the film that we will present later on. This idea of communism and consumerism was it was a topic very special of Yugoslavia. Can we say that, Bojan?
Yes.
Yes, so we can hear what you are going to tell to us. Thank you. Good work.
Okay. Well, now the history of Yugoslavia and after the Second World War was defined in different ways, partially as the official title was the Yugoslav Path to Socialism, or more recently the development-oriented dictatorship. It was characterized by social benefits, welfare, relative freedom being a dictatorship. But like most paths, it's as much a product of contingency as preconceived plan. Now, of course, every story about Yugoslavia, post-war Yugoslavia, starts at 1948 with the Tito-Stalin split, but that's not where, of course, we do trace the liberalization of the regime, because it was a period of fierce persecution of opponents, but also it was a period of search for an alternative model, which came, of course, from relationship to Marx and the idea of the association of free producers that would later in the Yugoslav theory become a self-management theory. Also in the later years, the contraposition between Yugoslavia and the Soviet Union brought the official ideology to insist more on standard of living of the citizens rather than on development of heavy industry, which was, of course, present, but to a lesser degree than in the Soviet Union. Now, these are some of the first demarcation lines of the process, the law on the management of the state companies, the so-called 3D. And the gradual abandonment of the five-year scheme, a five-year plan scheme, substituted to general political economic directives. But as you see, this is a banknote from a later period, you can see the Stakhanovism model was still quite in fashion, at least in the official circles. This is Alija Sirotanović, who was a coal mining world record in 1848. Now, the Western, in this new communist society, we would say that there is a connection with the West that goes before. We heard it as far as the Soviet Union is concerned. There also the connection with the older bourgeoisie. But the new Western influences were given mostly to reading rooms and cultural centers of the consulates and embassies, but that were very limited public and high surveillance of the police, and both social surveillance through the packages of the international relief programs, but also from help from the relatives abroad. we have largely economic emigration in the pre-war period, interwar period, some 5 million individuals, including their families, and the post-war emigres, which are established around 112,000. The help from the relatives was the single largest source of income in post-war Yugoslavia, this international help. And the second, or what would then later become the first sector of economy, which was tourism, was, as you see, 1958, it was $7 million, and whereas in the same time it was $16 million in direct help from relatives. And this is only the money part. The other part was sent in packages, that is packet, which are then resold in these special shops that are called Communism, which sold resold foreign goods and sold what is also interesting, the goods that were confiscated by the border guards. So when one of the first sportsmen went out of Yugoslavia, and the journalists asked him how was Paris, and he said, Paris is great, it's wonderful, it's like an enormous commission, which gets the idea of how the West was perceived. Now, the travel is, of course, the most important, and I will dedicate basically my paper to it. How it opened, how the process of opening of travel began. And so in the 50s it was very limited, but there was this, again, a particular idea within the Yugoslav communists that there should be a degree of freedom of choice, of individual freedom of choice, but that should be conceded only to the politically righteous. So there's this dichotomy that starts in the 1950s. So I'm trying to show a bit about who are the first people who came into contact with the West. Of course, we have heard Professor Rep, and I would not linger on that question of the Slovenian and nearby Slovenian-Italian border, the Udine agreements, 1955. There's just an anecdote I would like to add. Seemingly, there was this cross-border petty trade agreement of local products, so that any Italian living near the border could sell his goods in Slovenia and vice versa, was used also to smuggle officially horses from Macedonia, which were brought to, let's say, Sežana, and then sold as locals, but it was actually a state enterprise. But the second largest geographical group is Belgrade as a city. As we see, the last year of exit visas from Yugoslavia, 61,000 were issued in Belgrade out of 100,000. The percentage is quite clear here. It's 61%, and in a city that had at the time, in the same year, only 600,000 inhabitants, so it's 1/10 of the population. As far as social groups are concerned, of course, there are party leaders, diplomats, and high-ranking bureaucrats, which I will not consider too much in the paper. But also there were athletes, sportswomen and sportsmen, university students, and from the late 50s onwards on organized groups, which always had to have a raison d'être. They had to have a larger, a bigger meaning, be it a full football match, a cultural event, or sightseeing. It couldn't be just tourism for the sake of it. Now all of these groups were engaged in smuggling money and goods, and that's one thing that's kind of, I believe, that kind of evaporates in most of the discourses on Yugoslav smuggling. And not only did the Yugoslavs smuggle goods back to Yugoslavia, but they also mostly smuggled foreign currency out of Yugoslavia, because there were quite strict limitations. They would get a bit lighter, and the roof that you could get out of the country was becoming gradually bigger, but nonetheless you had just a limited amount of foreign currency that you could take out of the country. And so that's the first part, smuggling out of the country, and then smuggling back in. This is Crvena Zvezda in 1951. And so the athletes were really privileged in this in this situation, because not only they could take out a certain legal amount of money that any citizen could, they also got some refunds or prizes if they won outside the country. So they got foreign currency in cash or on in the place. And again, an anecdote I believe is quite interesting, that later Prime Minister of Milošević, Serbia, was actually a cyclist in the period of 1950s, and he used cycling tournaments to go around Europe, and he would then fill his bicycle frame with nylon socks, and then when he came back to the country, he would sell them and gain profit. So and of course then he went to America and founded a big pharmaceutical industry, but that's another pair of shoes. Now it was travel from a certain point was encouraged by the system, or at least parts of the system. And there is, as early as 1955, there's this article in Student, Belgrade magazine for students, which actually is describing this new phenomenon of hitchhiking in the United States, and in really positive terms, not as adventure seeking, which I don't know, the original is avanturism, which is quite frequent. Avanturismo, credo che you could say in Italian, but it really had a negative. Adventure was something truly negative within the socialist system. So, but saying that hitchhiker is not an adventure, but it's seeking for new knowledge. So the first openings were for the students. For example, at Belgrade University, 1/6 of the student population in the mid-50s went abroad, be it language students that would go and learn other courses. They were all organized groups, but they were permitted to go out. But here another pattern is getting formed, as they were penniless, and so there was another type of smuggling. Instead of smuggling money out of the country, foreign currency, they started smuggling goods. And of course, football fans would catch up really early about that. They were smuggling spirits like rakia, the local grappa, or whatever they could get from their home village, let's say, or wherever, in order to sell it abroad, and then from the money that they got, they would basically buy textile and clothing and everything that made them cool. So, on the other, after, of course, the 1960s, the borders will be opening. But it is important to insist on the fact that the communist regime, Yugoslav communist regime, was really focused on this idea of the well-being of citizens, and it did do some things that were in line, let's say, with the massification of the bourgeois model, which was going on even on the West, even in the West. So you see that from the last years before the Second World War and 1948, which is still reconstruction, post-war reconstruction, the number of domestic tourists on the Adriatic coast has doubled. Though 1939 was surely economically better year than 1948. Now in 61. The exit visas are abolished, and in the following period, the next 2 decades, the annual flow to the West would be around 30,000 individuals a year. In 65, we have the first agreements on workforce exportation, that would later come to be known as Gastarbeiteri, which was Germanish origin, I believe, Gastarbeiter, guest worker, that would go international, or sometimes arranged by their own companies in Yugoslavia, sometimes by themselves, that would go and work for a certain period in abroad. Of course, these were already a bit problematic, but it was more of an accepted thing, since they brought so much money back into the country. But on the ideological point of view, it was highly problematic, because the perfect society could not permit people to want at all to go to an imperfect, corrupt, and decaying Western, above all German, because most of them went to Germany, the Bundesrepublik state. So you can see that by 71 you had like 700, more than almost 800,000 Yugoslav workers in the Western Europe, mostly in Germany, with around Yugoslavia ranging around 20 million inhabitants. But what I do think is a figure that's quite amazing is that 22 million trips abroad, which should be compared to the same, more or less the same population. That means that in this time period, basically everybody went abroad at least once a year, which maybe it can even be seen as a frenzy. Now, I think we went over this already, but the thing is that gradually increasing the opportunities for people to travel and to the West and to see Western model became became basically it was permitted by the state, and it was something that came to mine the socialist system, which in the same period was undergoing a rather big transformation. Now, the urban inhabitants above 20,000 of places, I guess above 20,000 people, became a majority in Yugoslavia only in 1985. Yet the number of industrial workers rocketed even before that, because we have the phenomenon of people staying in the village and continuing to work and getting a job in the factory. Now we see the percentage of agricultural workers dropping from 75% to 57% in 2 decades, and the agriculture was still a problem. It was about 1/3 agricultural unemployment yet in the mid-60s, but nevertheless, the spending on food, which is kind of basic thing about standard, the spending of food was gradually decreasing in the family budget, going from 54% in 1953 to less than 40% in 1970. So basically the other part of the family budget, of course, had to go to pay rent or to pay the domestic equipment, but it also could go to consumption, etc. But I will not go into the economics of Yugoslavia, but there is this also very important fact that what can be considered as a sort of gold period of Yugoslavia, which is the 1960s. Nevertheless, though both in the 1960s and the 1970s there's a growth of standard, growth of income, this is not really backed up by productivity, as we see here in the example of industrial workers, where 23% of wage income corresponds only to 3.4% of productivity income in the same year. Now, but nevertheless, there's time, there is money in the 1960s, and there is a model of maybe even not consumerism, but also hedonism, which comes from the very top, from Tito, who was always enjoying the company of Hollywood movie stars. He was a big fan of the movies, as we all know. Here he is with Sophia Loren. But you can find other pictures as well, and in almost every authoritarian society, maybe even in every society, the models you can always see the models of the fashions and the models of comportamentali behavior that do trickle down from the top to the bottom. So this again is quite interesting. It's the 1970s, and it's a row in Belgrade, a queue, not for oil or flour, but it's for the cinema. That's Kinoteka, which means that there's a huge interest in developing in cinema, which also transmits Western models, and another interesting fact, for example, the USA did subsidize the importance of the import of Hollywood movies in Yugoslavia. So this is in front of Tommy. In the cinema you have screening of Tommy, the rock opera. rock music, of course, again. And also, not only socially, the culture, the state changes. Not only it changes in its tastes, but the very Communist Party undergoes a radical social change. Well, the first data is only curiosity. That means only 1 out of 4 of the pre-war party members survived the Second World War. So, but in 1945, when the partisans win the war, they have 140,000 members. So they become mass party. Now, out of which roughly half were peasants, 1/3 were workers, 1/10 were civil servants, and the rest. Whereas 2 decades later, the workers remain the same in percentage within the party, but only 7% are the peasants, and roughly almost 40% are civil servants, which basically means that we have a new class. Well, not. Everybody, okay. A new class building here, which is new middle class socialist or communists, and Bojan Mitrović, author of Yugoslav history, is called them the socialist bourgeoisie. They have a mentality that's loyal to the party, but it's also used to well-being and to the commodities of the West. And here we have a nice example taken again from Bojan Mitrović's book, which says, we go to Trieste twice a year to buy clothing and cosmetics. Italian clothes are not so much better, that's an opinion, and they are more expensive, but we want what the others don't have, even if we have to pay for it. Now, that's partially my thesis here, that if we are talking about, and we will be talking about in the movie, about the 1960s and 70s trips to Trieste and the smuggling that took place here, we are not talking about subsistence. We are not talking about Martin Krpan, who is smuggling in order to survive. We are talking about a smuggling that's almost a luxury. It's a smuggling that comes after the basic needs are satisfied, and it comes to satisfy not only cultural but also fashion needs and the needs for distinguishment, basically, if I could recall Bourdieu on this. So in the early years, the party control of the communications with the West was actually increased the desire for foreign goods and fashion. Western goods had a value that was higher than intrinsic, in the sense that they became a status symbol on themselves and not only for the value they had. The reward here for being a good communist was also to be able to participate in consumerism. Now, as the regime stabilized, you would have this privilege, which was granted to the few, extended to the majority, to the population, which also viewed this privilege or right or new freedom as a reward for, I guess, being loyal. But not only good communists came to Trieste, but also people that probably weren't so good communists. Thank you.